We have this idea of a mentally healthy person that is like happy all the time, can take on endless amounts of stress, that doesn't suffer, that doesn't feel grief, that doesn't struggle, that's like able to just like Terminator mode and accomplish everything that they want. And like nobody is that. And our industry has all these diagnoses, right? Like ADHD, right? Personality disorders, even things like bipolar to some extent, right? Anxiety disorder, right? Depression, that like, sure, there are times where that is a problem, but it's also part of being human. And I think what I hate my industry for truly, because there are many therapists that I call, validation victim therapists, where I think they just like continue to reiterate these diagnoses on people, where people associate so much with their diagnosis that they like think that they're broken in a way. And it keeps the therapist in business. So I guess there's like some value to the therapist in that, but it's like, it's thinking that, yeah, if you're ADHD and you get distracted sometimes, doesn't mean that your brain is broken, man. It means that you're a human and you get distracted sometimes.
How do young men like us optimize our lives in a way that lets us achieve success and meaning? Come with me as I interview top performers and delve into key areas of life: habits, finance, psychology, health, relationships, work, creativity, and business. I boil the ocean of men's advice into usable wisdom in this podcast to give you the answers. My name is Blake Bottrell, and this is the Distilled Podcast. My guest today wants you to be the hero of your own story. Reviving the taboo of men's only spaces and upholding specific pillars of masculinity, he is challenging and guiding men to be the best versions of themselves. His goal is to take people from solo summiting World of Warcraft's Mount Hyjal to summiting mountains in the backwoods of Colorado with a group of brand new brothers. Marc Azoulay, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I love the World of Warcraft reference. I'm also a nerd, so that's always great. It's always great to get that. Yeah. Happy to be here.
How does picking 2 to 3 weeds per day constitute absolutely dominating gardening? And why is that analogous to self-improvement?
Well, so I think a masculine value or a value that a lot of guys need to build, right, is discipline. And I think where you're getting that from is I did a talk on procrastination. And I think a lot of guys get that hero journey from procrastination, right? We like avoid, avoid, avoid. The weeds grow, the garden gets out of control. And then we have to be a hero. We got to like get the machete out and the flamethrower and like cut through everything. And it's really exciting, right? A lot of guys like get off on that. A lot of guys, we feel grandiose, like, oh my God, I am a genius. All right, I can pull this thing off. But what the real work is doing those 2 to 3 weeds a day, right? It's not glamorous. It's not fun. You don't feel like a hero. You just feel like you're doing a chore. But that is the idea of building that discipline and showing up every single day for your life, And it means kind of moving from a more adolescent version of what it means to be a hero, which is those big swings, those underdog stories, those like big glitz and glamour, right, to what I think a more mature version of heroics is, which is a lot more quiet confidence, and a lot more discipline and consistency, reliability.
I love that. It makes me think of a quote that I heard from Alex Hormozy a few months back. And his quote is about patience, but I think it relates to this idea of just doing a whole bunch of little things and then eventually you get there. And the quote that I have on my desktop now is, the quote is, patience isn't about waiting. It's about figuring out what to do in the meantime.
Yeah, I love that. I love that, right? Like it's about doing those like little things over and over again because I found that again, like with self-improvement, right? I'm a psychotherapist. So self-improvement people are like, I want to quit drinking today. I want to change my relationship today. I want to like get jacked today. And we set ourselves out for these incredibly high standards and these crazy ambitious goals. And a lot of guys just burn out because it takes a lot of humility to be patient, I think, right? It takes a lot of like realizing like, you know what? I'm not going to get jacked in a week. I'm going to like struggle and sweat and like really like eat shit, honestly, for a long time until I'm able to reach those goals. And I think, I just wish that message was more broadcasted.
So I saw that you dropped this email course about 3 hours ago called Pathway to Masculinity. Can you give me a high-level run-through of the stepping stones that are included in that course and why you feel they're necessary to be there?
Yeah, for sure, man. So, yeah, just literally just launched that today. It's a free email course for dudes, 10 weeks. Just the idea is to take an audit of all these different facets of your life and then improve them, right? So, the six are as follows, right? So, the first one is finding male mentorship. And high level, essentially, we have guys do an audit of messages that they've got about being a man, about being masculine in the world, positive, negative, good, bad, ugly, whatever it is, from fathers, from TV, from pastors, from teachers, whatever it is. And what I found in the work that I've done is a lot of guys actually don't have male mentors. Like, it's not even that they have good or bad ones, they have zero. They don't really consider other men to be mentors. I think especially our generation, we're very critical of older men. So they're like, yeah, like fuck them, right? So it's like throw everything out. And I think it leads to a lot of loneliness, a lot of confusion. So that's number one. I'm sure we'll dig into them more in depth as we go. Number two is creating an honor code, right? So I think this is in place. It's like a secular answer to religion, right? Or creating an ethic would be another way of looking at it. But I do believe that as men, we have to have an honor code. I don't really care what it is. I have mine, which is strength, courage, mastery, and honor. But you can have whatever you want, right? But I think having a set of beliefs or values or convictions that you back up no matter what, and that you testing the fire of life is critical of becoming a dependable, stable man. And again, it doesn't matter what they are, but you have to have something, right? Next one's leading into community. So developing healthy community and being a functional part of community. I think a lot of men do that through work, right? But we also do it through volunteership, through teacher, through nurturing, through being a father. A lot of men are freaking lonely, right? So in that, we have our guys audit their community, audit their friendships, audit their relationships. And again, most people come up with zero inner circle, right? Zero people they trust, zero people that in a case of medical emergency that they would call on for help. It's pretty bleak out there for
Yeah,
dudes.
the
if you're
the
getting that
most
picture.
common answer to how many best friends could you call on in any sort of situation for men today is zero. Not the
Is
is
zero.
like not the highest by percentage, but
Yes.
the most overall answer is zero.
Is zero. It's like real dark. It's real dark out there. Yeah. So we actually bring up that stat in that lean in community one and like get the sense of like, okay, how do you make friends, especially as an adult, right? As someone that's like, 25, 30, right? How do you make friends? The next one is developing awareness of privilege, which, is a political topic, but I don't think should be. I think that's a very real thing that men need to think about and talk about without shame. And in the privilege one, because that is more of a spicy topic, we talk about both the power you get from privilege and the expectations, right? Like it is a double-sided sword, right? Like we get a lot of benefits and we're expected to carry a lot of load. And I think men tend to fall on either side of that, where they either get too power hungry and abuse their privilege, or they become too victim-y and just focus on the load rather than seeing the blend between the two. And then the very last one is kind of the psychotherapy piece, which is understanding trauma and conditioning. So the idea of understanding like the pains and the hurts and the patterns that have been through our lives and how they create who we are today. And understanding that so that we can then heal it and then evolve into somebody that is better and free of those burdens. So yeah, that's the high level view of what's going on with that course.
I love it. I think the starting with male mentors as the first module resonates with me a lot. I was doing dishes the other day and Good People by Jack Johnson came on, and I just thought to myself, fuck, this guy was 15 years ahead of his time. I don't see the good people on the TV shows. It's like we really did something to sort of undermine the way a lot of guys look at who there is to be around. Mr. Rogers went off the air and nobody took his place.
Yeah, right. There isn't that. Where's the Mr. Rogers? Where's the Martin Luther King? Right? Like where are these heroes? Where's the Gandhi? Right? Where are these guys that are this beautiful blend of compassion and power? Right? Like they were able to have such loving, open hearts and wonderful missions and be so powerful and so masculine in those missions. And we don't have it. I mean, there's a lot of boys, a lot of old boys running the show rather than men. And I think our society is really struggling because of that,
Yeah, I think as far as I can tell, we've got this sort of pipeline of struggling young boys that turn into young men that either grow up or don't grow up and grow up the wrong way or whatever that looks like. And it seems like some of our biggest cultural institutions have decided that they don't really care about the plights of men. And so I'm thankful for what you're doing to sort of bring some of this back to the limelight a little bit. And I was hoping maybe today we could sort of like tease apart some of the causes and symptoms and remedies of
Yeah.
what are needed to sort of right that ship. So I think maybe a good starting point there is if you could give me like a quick overview of the typical guy that walks into your practice.
Yeah. So there's kind of two. So I'll give you both of them, right? I think the most common is actually divorced man. So it's a guy in his late 30s, early 40s, maybe early 50s that is divorced. And unfortunately, a lot of men only come to therapy or only come to coaching or whatever, right? Self development in crisis. And for a lot of guys, it's divorce, right? So, like, even though they're coming in and they're in their 40s, they're still a boy. They're still maybe very selfish in some ways. Maybe they have an addiction that got out of control. Maybe they never learned how to attune to a woman. Maybe they never learned how to give love as a father. They were kind of running on these old operating systems that served them. Maybe they're very financially successful, but they never learned the more expansive definition of what it means to be a man or how to give back or how to be a paragon in society. And it caught up with them. So I think number one is the guy who walks in that is just kind of broken. Like he might have lost his community, might have lost his friends, maybe his job, maybe his kids, right? Half his stuff. But there's heroics in the fact of that he's ready to ask for help. And he's ready to realize, oh man, like I never quite did grow up. Like I never quite got there. I am missing some things. So he's number one. And then I think number two is a guy usually in late 20s, early 30s that's been kind of radicalized. I work with a lot of radicalized men that went down a road, whether that be pickup artistry or Antifa or Proud Boys, or Andrew Tate, Red Pill, right? Like that really bought into a view of masculinity. And then again, realized that didn't actually work in the world. Typically didn't actually work with women because they kind of did it to get laid ultimately, right? They were kind of raised by the internet. Maybe they're incels, and they realized, oh my God, I can't live my life this way. Doesn't work. And they were searching for something, again, real. I think male community, male role model, male mentors, a sense of purpose, an honor code, all the stuff I talked about in that email course, right? But like it's very flimsy and they end up not being able to succeed, and like the industry calls that failure to launch, which I think is like shitty because it puts all the onus on the person. Like, oh, your rocket ship is broken, you failed to launch. Whereas I think, kind of what you're talking about, Blake, like our society failed to equip these guys for the reality of life. They really didn't have a chance coming out.
I heard a really good point today, actually. I don't know if you know who Dr. K is. Healthy gamer.
I don't know.
He is a psychotherapist that does a lot of work with professional gamers and high tier influencers in the gaming space. And he went on the Diary of a CEO podcast a couple of weeks ago, and then people started clipping him pseudo out of context. So he just gave like a 2-hour rundown of some of his thoughts and getting into some stuff on male suicidality and stuff. But I heard him make a really good point today that I've never heard made about some of the like red pill, incel, alpha male stuff. And they're guys who either asked for help terribly because they didn't know how, or they never asked for help out of shame. And so instead of being assimilated into what would be you and I would call regular culture of any sort, they sort of enter this radicalized subculture because the internet now makes it so that you find your community no matter where you are. But that was the filtering mechanism of not being able to ask for help properly. And so they ended up here by proxy, not by choice.
I think it's a really good point. I love that, right? Like, I think it's like never ask for help, but never reality tested, because like, just like you said, right? If you're on Reddit communities or 4chan or whatever, right? Like you can always find people to agree with you. And with all these algorithms and shit, right? Like we're getting fed that echo chamber over and over again. And shit, man, I mean, I can share a little bit about me, right? Like I was like an overweight nerd in, middle school, high school. And if I was exposed to that, if I was being raised in this current generation, I probably would have bought into that. Right. I remember having some of the thoughts about women, right? Feeling like betrayed or feeling like I was owed a girlfriend or feeling like, oh, I'm the nice guy. And it's all these assholes that get the women. And it's like, it's because I'm like too nice, and I'm like too good of a person. Like I believe that, I mean, for me, it was a whole journey of drug use and then therapy and all this stuff. But like, I would have been a target to a lot of those messages. And I think like it's because I never asked for help, like you said, and I never reality checked my thoughts. So I was being raised by, when I was 14, I was being raised by a 14-year-old, right? I was being raised by myself or raised by the internet or raised by other people that weren't good role models. And I never talked to my parents about that. I never sought a counselor. I never had a mentor that I could be like, hey, is this how the world works? Like, is this actually real? Or is this just like what I'm reading on a forum?
So I think there's a whole bunch of things that sort of fold into this. But I wonder if part of it is like the organization around childhood or boyhood activities. I'm trying to think of this as a filter through the lens of we've basically gotten rid of almost all of the hobbies that little boys have and replaced it all with video games. And there's not that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a gamer. We've established we're both gamers, but there's not that same social dynamic of going out and kicking a soccer ball around or just going to the park and making up a game with your friends. And the dopamine has taken over and everybody's switched to video games, and we're now being parented by the screens, for lack of a better analogy.
Like, I think that's true. And I would just build on that point of it's all about outcome. It's all about like your League of Legends rank, or about like your Call of Duty stars, right? I think, and I think even, the generation before us, when it was sports and things, like it was a lot about outcome, right? It was about like, what team are you on? How many points did you score? Are you the star? Are you going to get a scholarship? A lot of it was like, are you good enough to get a scholarship? Honestly, as I say that out loud, right? I think there was like a huge outcome focus. And I think there's less of a focus on like sportsmanship, right? Like, forget about how good you are. I mean, of course, that's important and it's worth being challenged, but like, are you a good team player? Can you deal with conflict? Are you going to trash talk the opponents, or are you going to treat them with respect? I think so much stuff is for boys now is focused on this massive competition. I mean, I have a little bit of a taboo view, but I think men require hierarchy and strive in hierarchy, right? Even though in the current world, hierarchy is like the devil. I think there's good ways to do it, right? But I think like when you're looking at the hierarchy of the whole world, right, or the whole server, right? Like most guys are going to be on the bottom half of that. So it's this idea of us pinging that. I think it really drives guys into the ground. Whereas I think when maybe it's fantasy, but this idea of it being more local, more personal, being, having more hierarchies, right? Of like, hey, okay, maybe you're not that good at soccer, but you're really funny. I mean, having other ways to score points that are more intimate, I think is really critical. I mean, I've you can talk about gaming. Like I played a bunch of MMOs, right, in my day, and like I remember earlier MMOs, I think specifically like EverQuest and Star Wars Galaxies were very collaborative. Whereas even World of Warcraft, you mentioned earlier, like it started getting more and more competitive, more and more about who was like server first to kill Ragnaros or whatever, right? Like it became this more of the status game and less of what I think the original intent was, which was like an online community, right? Like an online world of like other nerds that you can just like role play with. It seems like everything is moving towards this like competition, outcome focused, ranking way of being rather than just like how do you participate,
I think the perfect analogy there is they saw a re-explosion of the base game when they re-released it 6 years later, because the original base game was built around that community and people were looking for that, right? And that was like bigger than the retail game that year when it relaunched again, like 15 or 20 years later, whatever the anniversary was. So yeah, it's crazy how deprived people are of that. And I think going back to your idea of hierarchy, and like everybody should have an ability to thrive in their role. And we've sort of flattened it down so that there are these three specific roles. And if you don't fit these roles, then you're kind of shit out of luck. And there's another quote here that I put in a newsletter a couple months ago, and it just says, in the modern world, way more people are lost. They don't know what they're supposed to do. In the past, we had trajectory to follow. It hurts some people because it wasn't the trajectory for them. But when you take away all trajectory, then everybody's lost. And that really hits home for me, and that I think we've done a really good job of sort of optimizing for outliers almost. And we've a little bit demonized what has always been sort of popular for a reason, because it sort of brought fulfillment to the largest swath of people. And in like trying to cater to every little edge case, we've sort of lost the plot as a whole almost.
Yeah, for sure. And I think like being a good man is not cool anymore, right? You almost have to be an outlier. You have to have some crazy comeback story or have some crazy identity. But I imagine like the idea of like, hey, you know what? I'm a good dad. I make good money, right? Like I'm involved in my community. I'm showing up with ethics. Like that's not cool. In fact, a lot of those guys get demonized. They get like shot down like, oh, you're boring, you're lame, you're a square, right? Or you're an oppressor, right? You're like a white oppressor, right? Like I think this idea of like just being a positive force for good, is like it's not enough. You have to be an influencer. You have to have your own podcast. I'm saying this to someone who has a podcast, right? Like you have to like, I don't know, change the world. I mean, the bar is like really, really high rather than just being like, you know what? Like Frank comes to the barbecues and he's real good at smoking a pork butt, right? Like, I mean, that's fine. And I think there's like a lot of honor in like having a simple yet connected life. Yeah, I'm wondering like if you feel that like being an internet presence.
Certainly. I mean, I wouldn't call myself an internet presence by any stretch of the imagination, but the goal is to obviously hopefully be there at some point. But yeah, it's just, and I should say that that does take a backseat to everything else that I think about with my life. Like my primary objective in whatever this project is, with a podcast and a newsletter and whatever it is, the sole focus of why I'm doing that lives at the top of everything else that I think about is how can I give my wife the easiest life possible? That's it. That's like the whole beginning, middle, end. And if this is the pathway to that, by all means, let's do it. If it's something else, I'm going to go work a 9 to 5 and be a good dad, like you say, like I'm more than happy if that's the answer too.
Yeah, I think it's having clear values, right? And a clear mission is like absolutely critical. And taking care of and providing for a family is, I think, it's traditional male role. Like again, it might be lame or whatever, but I think that is what we've done throughout history. Is we are the protectors, we are the guardians, we are the creators of structure, order, and vision. And it's critical for us to be able to execute that, right? Whether it be at like the micro scale of a family, right? Or the macro scale of being the CEO of a company. Again, it doesn't really matter. Like the content doesn't matter. But I do think like the process and I think like the underlying relationships and underlying patterns are what's important.
How do you feel about sort of the demonization and straw manning of male problems at this point? Because I like the second largest or largest movie in the past year, depending on how you want to look at it, was an entire caricature of what it's like to be a man in 2024. And I just feel like we've jumped the shark a little bit in terms of where we should be with upholding both sexes. And the caveat here, because you have to put it on everything, is that women absolutely have problems and are experiencing, in a lot of ways, much greater plights than we are. But that doesn't excuse the fact that men aren't still going through some of these things as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's, how do I say this? I think it's complicated, but I'll give you a better answer than that, right? Like, I think a lot of male problems, our problems get kind of shoehorned into a couple things, right? Either like we drink too much, we're too angry, right? We're not getting enough sex, and I think it really cuts off a lot of what the male experience is, and also what it could be. Here's my caveat because you always got to do it, right? It's like I think feminism is awesome, and I think it's done a shit ton of great work, and I think men need to catch up. We haven't had our version of that. We haven't had our version of really understanding like what it means to be masculine and redefining it for the modern era, where we aren't taken for granted or we aren't like necessary anymore, right? Like women can have jobs. Awesome. That's great. But now our role as a provider that I was just talking about, like that is under threat. And I think a lot of men, if you go back historically, right, in the 60s and 70s, got in touch with their feminine side, which is good, but it's still not masculine in a way, right? Like we were kind of role playing what's like to be more feminine, just like how, women in first wave feminism were role playing or cosplaying, I guess maybe is a better word, cosplaying more masculine. But now that the women's movement's in actually a really good place overall, where it accepts all different types of women. And I think the men's side of that, we haven't quite got there. I think there's like trad men, right, that are just like very traditional masculine. We have to do it this way. There's like the more queer LGBTQ, which is, great and super inclusive, but very judgmental of more traditional men. Like, I feel like men are very fractured at this point, and we don't, like we're saying before, we don't have like leaders, don't have people to look for. We're still kind of fighting and bickering with each other. And I think the biggest male problem, to kind of just narrow in on it, which we did talk about earlier, is loneliness. I think a lot of men are very, very disconnected, and not only are disconnected, but don't know how to connect. Like, literally don't know how to talk about their feelings, are literally too afraid to say that they were scared or sad or in grief or hurt. And I think we end up like living in these like weird prisons in our minds that we create, where we think we know what life is about, but we've never actually talked about it with anybody. So I do think it's kind of sad out there for men. And I think community is the answer, like real community. And, my thing is masculine community. So I think community of other guys that get it and can go there, so we can talk with people that are different from us and become better overall, right? Like, evolve through challenge and evolve through difference.
So how do we get people out of living in their head and back to living in communities?
It's hard, right? I mean, like I was saying earlier, like a lot of guys don't do this until their life falls apart, because I don't think we're not very proactive in this way. So a lot of the communities that I've found are communities of need. So, I mean, I'm sober, been sober for 10 years. And my first exposure to, community was like AA, right? And recovery community. But it's guys that have like had their lives shattered. And we're like, okay, well, I lost everything. I might as well try this like friend thing, I might as well try this like community thing. I think, I moved up to a small mountain town, and we just had a giant snowstorm. We had 4 feet of snow last week. And I experienced another community of need, which was a lot more positive than, Alcoholics Anonymous. But it was like, we're sharing snow equipment. We're giving each other food, like literally like cake, and you borrow like, a stick of butter kind of thing, right? Like I did that, or like taking care of each other's dog, like this idea of being in a place of danger, right? Like real elemental danger, creating community. But again, I think a lot of people live in safe places where they don't need community in the same way that we did for most of human history. So community becomes more optional. So I think it's hard. I mean, my hope is that something like, men's therapy online, like my company can do that with therapy as the vehicle of finding people who at least acknowledge that they have a need for it, and then bringing them out into actually becoming friends with each other. And it's also wild. Like, people would rather be therapy group members than be a friend, or being a friend seems more risky than like doing this therapy game together. And I'm like, really? Like, don't you want friends? Like, you talk about how lonely you are, but then it's like, hey, call Bob. And they're like, nah, it's just like, I think it's really, really hard to do it. I don't know if you have any ideas, but
I don't know. I thought about it, and it's something that I'm still sort of mulling over as part of whatever this distilled brand looks like, is some sort of community aspect to it. Because to your point, I think it's like just sorely needed. And you said optional, and I'd never really thought about it that way. I'd just sort of seen it as a negative consequence of the atomization of sort of society as a whole, but I'd never really thought about it as an option. I guess it's an option that's very heavily skewed in one direction by where we sort of sit in society. There's a lot of thumb on the scale of what we need, or what we're told we need, as far as community goes. So, but I'm glad that it's certainly coming full circle and coming back around to people realizing they need it again. And it makes me think that we're almost going to see sort of a revival of like fraternal organizations or something. Like, is the Masons going to get a revival? Like, who knows?
yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, I guess, I hope so. Right. Like I hope some of these institutions are able to modernize and be more accepting, because a lot of them are not. Right. And a lot of them have like a lot of certainly internalized homophobia as a big part, but also internalized racism and classism. Right. But I think like if I can impress anything to listeners, it's like there was wisdom in those things. Right. Like, yes, there's a shit ton of problematic things that need to be updated, like full stop, and there was wisdom in like these guys gathering and trying to create something. I mean, I think, the fraternal organizations are taboo because a lot of them are like the clan, right? But like, if you go back to like ancestral masculinity, right, there's, you have like the men's lodge, like in many, many different cultures, right? The men will go out in their day and fulfill their roles. They'd be hunters or builders or stonemasons or, construction or whatever, right? Guards. But then they would all gather at the men's lodge, which got replaced by the bar and had alcohol, which is a whole other thing. But before there was no alcohol, you just like sit and you talk with men. You're like, hey, like, how's the village? Like, do we have fish? Did you kill the freaking panther? Like, like you get updated on the status of the community, and then you would then go out into your family and be in domestic life. And we don't have that, right? Like, we don't know what's going on in our communities. We're not invested in our towns. We're not invested in like our local businesses or our local governments, right? Like that stuff is like, again, not cool. It's not cool, but like it's where you live. Like, I don't know. I just hope people get more invested with that. But with the internet and when we're talking before, it's so diluted and diffused that you don't have to be, right? Like it doesn't matter what your town is doing because you can get your needs met. Well, I don't know, kind of get your needs met right online.
I love this discussion on community. And I remember writing a blog post that came from a newsletter, blog post, whatever you want to call it, about sort of the idea that a lot of mental health issues stem from the idea that there's this incongruence with what you've talked about previously with not living up to your values. And I wonder if I could just read an excerpt here and then we can sort of riff on it a little bit. So, what if I told you that most of the way that you think about mental health is wrong? It's not your fault, it's what we've been taught. Your mental health is a subjective measure of how you feel in any particular moment. What if I offered an alternative idea? Here's 2 facts for you. You will never be mentally healthy if your girlfriend is upset, and a father is never any happier than his most miserable child. Based on those 2 statements, we can posit that mental health isn't really mental at all. It's based on circumstances that exist around you. Additionally, it's not subjective, it's based on very tangible reasons. Mental health might be more closely related to the idea of all the structures in your life that create your identity are working in harmony. And when those structures are off, a message that is incongruent with the one that you tell yourself, that is when stress and worry and anxiety set in.
Yeah, right. Like I think this idea of mental health and like my industry, right, psychotherapy is the problem, right? We have this idea of a mentally healthy person that is like happy all the time, can take on endless amounts of stress, that doesn't suffer, that doesn't feel grief, that doesn't struggle, that's like able to just like Terminator mode and accomplish everything that they want. And like nobody is that. And our industry has all these diagnoses, right? Like ADHD, right? Personality disorders, even things like bipolar to some extent, right? Anxiety disorder, right? Depression, that like, sure, there are times where that is a problem, but it's also part of being human. And I think what I hate my industry for truly, because there are many therapists that I call, validation victim therapists, where I think they just like continue to reiterate these diagnoses on people, where people associate so much with their diagnosis that they like think that they're broken in a way. And it keeps the therapist in business. So I guess there's like some value to the therapist in that, but it's like, it's thinking that, yeah, if you're ADHD and you get distracted sometimes, doesn't mean that your brain is broken, man. It means that you're a human and you get distracted sometimes, right? Like kind of what you're saying, like if you're depressed, it's not that you are a depressed person. It means that like, yeah, maybe your relationship with your wife is not that great. You know, I think that like the standard for a mentally healthy individual is impossible. And it's reiterated again by stuff we're talking about in this episode of, social media and influencers and seeing everyone's highlight reel, et cetera, and not seeing the complexity of what it means to be a human. And I think it puts the solution in the wrong place. It puts it in like, oh, just go inward, go inward, go inward. Think your way out of your depression instead of what I'm hearing you talk about in your newsletter, which is like actually change something, like actually do something about it, like have that hard conversation with your wife, figure out how to support your kid, get in better shape, right? Like take responsibility and try to improve your environment so that you are happier with it.
Yeah, I heard again today another one that I hadn't heard before that was like the differentiation between someone who actually has a brain chemistry malfunction and someone who just has SLS, which is shitty life syndrome.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite interventions that I use with my clients, right, is like, how should it feel, right? Like, you just got broken up with, you're drinking way too much, right? You don't make enough money, you're building up debt. Like, should you be happy? Probably not, right? Like you should probably be like a little upset and like a little sad and like a little depressed. Like it makes sense, but like let's keep moving, right? Let's like take some action so that you don't feel a little shitty all the time. But yeah, I mean, I'm also, I was in Boulder before Evergreen, and there's like a big Buddhist community, and there's a lot of what's called spiritual materialism or spiritual bypassing in those communities, which is like, it's the exact same idea of like, oh, I can just like the perfect enlightened person doesn't feel anything, is like unfazed, everything rolls off their back, they're always happy, they're like bulletproof, and it's just, I think it's really toxic. I think it's like a really toxic message to give to people. I think especially men, because I think men, we want to be. I think we want to be bulletproof. Whereas I believe most women want to feel and they want to have deep connections. They want to have the full spectrum of emotion. I think most men would prefer to be Terminator robots. And that's just not an attainable goal.
I want to come back to, you've mentioned this a couple of times here, but you have 4 pillars of masculinity that you say are part of your code. Can you run me through those and why you've come to the conclusion that those are the 4 pillars?
Yeah, so they're strength, courage, mastery, and honor. So I'll run you through what I mean by that, right? So strength, right, is I think a lot of things that men are, we're always gauging strength, right? And a lot of it's, again, because so much of our culture is service level, it's physical, like literally physical strength. Like how jacked is that dude? I think almost all men that I speak to are literally always gauging, like, am I more or less fit than this other man I'm looking at? Like it's just part of our weird animal monkey brain, right? But what modern masculinity is, and kind of the point I try to make in the videos I do about that, is like, because we're a modern society, it's not just about might makes right. For a lot of human history, that was the case, right? Like literally, if you were in better fitness, you would have more sex, you would make more kids, you would be able to survive if a lion attacked. But now, strength is much more than that. Strength can be emotional strength, right? It can be intellectual strength. It can be spiritual strength. Like there's so many more hierarchies to compete on, which is great because it means that we're not stuck in our spot. So yeah, like I'm an overweight Jewish kid from Maryland. Like I'm not going to be super jacked all the time. I mean, I'm fit, I'm like, I'm all right. I do CrossFit, right? But like, I'm maybe more on the emotional, spiritual strength side. Like there's like another game that I can play, another hierarchy I can climb. So I don't feel like trapped in that lower realm. So it's more about like understanding where you can build strength. But I do think the idea of what I define strength as is like carrying heavy load, right? Or manipulating heavy load. And again, you can have physical load, emotional load, intellectual load, spiritual load, right? So I think being able to do that, being able to shoulder heavy load is very masculine because that is our job. It's like doing the hard things and like carrying the heavy burdens for our families, for our communities, for the world, right? Like we are the ones that like pick up the boulder and start walking. And again, I think we're fortunate there's many different boulders. It's not just boulders. So that's one. Next one is courage, right? Which again, I think going back to what men value, I think courage is that, right? Like all of our movies, Marvel movies, hero movies, right? Like the idea of, fantasizing about war, right? Video games, right? This idea of being the one that charges into the breach and like slays the dragon, like something about courage is very, very respected by men. And that's the exact same argument I'll make for strength. Like there's many ways to demonstrate courage. And I think the idea of courage is Jocko Willink, right, has a great definition where he talks about Navy SEALs, right? He's like, it's not that Navy SEALs don't feel fear, it's that they learn how to operate while feeling fear, right? And like, that's the idea. And I think that's what our media, again, brainwashes men of like, oh, you be this bulletproof Terminator that is never afraid. And it's like, no. Courage is like being afraid. It's like, it's actually being afraid more than the average person, but still being able to function while you're afraid. And I think that's what helps men grow is through challenge. Going down the line, mastery, right? Mastery is like getting good at stuff, basically, right? Building skill, growing, kind of moving up those hierarchies, really becoming a master craftsman, right? A master father, a master business leader, like really just refining that. And in order to have mastery, you need courage and you need strength. You need to be able to take in feedback. I think I talked earlier on this episode about how I believe a lot of the men out there, men leaders, are actually boys. They're not men yet because they can't take in feedback. I think that's a big part of developing mastery, is taking in honest feedback without judgment and without shame. And that's what therapy is, right? I mean, I think real masculine therapy is like holding up that mirror and saying, hey, here's something you need to work on. Here's something you kind of suck at. but not making it about being better than you or you're losing points or there's like a competition, but like, no, I'm giving you this mirror because I love you. I actually love you so much and I respect you that I want you to grow. And the pursuit of mastery is that idea. And again, like the stuff doesn't matter. That's where I think toxic masculinity comes in, is that we take mastery and we just like pick a couple categories. Like, okay, you got to be like athlete, you got to be handy, you got to be, financially successful, maybe even be good at drinking, good at women, right? Like we narrow it down, but like shit, man, it doesn't matter. Like if you try to become the best poet or the best pottery or the best basket weaver or whatever, like it literally doesn't matter. Like the process of pursuing mastery is respectful. And that's something that I think has been lost. Another tangent of modern culture is like the artisan used to be something that was a very highly respected profession of being, wow, you're a really good craftsman. You're the best freaking sculptor in Venice, like there was something very respectful about that. But now we don't really respect the crafts and the trades in the way that I think we used to, or at least I believe we used to. I wasn't live, but I hope so.
To give the like absolute most poignant modern example on that, the implosion of Boeing planes lately as a result of the fact that nobody wants to be a tradesperson anymore. So the floor for what is required to become a tradesperson has gone downhill, and we're having plane doors fly off in the middle of flights. And it's like, oh my gosh, we really need to do something to get this respect back, right?
Yeah, 100%. Like you're building fucking airplanes. Are you kidding me? Like I can't build an airplane. I don't even know. I barely even know how an airplane works. Right? Like it's just like it's like metal tube with freaking some kind of like jet engine. Like what is it? Right? Like I have no idea. Right? Like there's so much like mastery and craftsmanship that goes into that. And I think again, there's a whole other conversation on capitalism and shit, right? But like they value the more business leadership stuff, which is valuable, but you also need to value like the craftsman, the mechanic, the designer, the engineer, right? The people that are actually bringing things into reality, and really acknowledging and having pride in that work, because it's crazy. Like, right, what people can make is crazy. And artists, right? Artists also need to be more valued. It's the same thing of like real art is like pretty nuts when you see what goes into it. And then the very last one is honor. So it kind of goes back to the honor code. But what I like to say about this is the etymology of the word hero, right? So hero, most people think it means the strength of two people, right? It's been mistranslated as that. So the idea of like, okay, if you're a hero, if you're Captain America, you're so strong, you're two people, right? You're like super soldier, right? But really what it means is the strength for two people, right? So it's about you're so strong that you can be strong for somebody else, right? Often family, right? Often weaker members of society, often people that are oppressed or marginalized, right? That's what really being a hero is, right? And it takes all those things together. It takes strength, courage, and mastery to live a life of honor, which is giving all of that away, right? All of it away, right? Like filling up your own cup, of course, but then giving it to your community and giving it to people that really need it, and doing it with honor, not fucking other people over, not building, your success on a trail of corpses and bodies, right? But like living a life where you are, like we talked before, a good sportsman, right? And a good rival and a good competitor and a good team member. That's what honor is all about. Not focusing only on personal gain, but focusing more on the larger picture, which, as you said 100 times on this show, is really lacking. I think it's really lacking in current culture, and certainly current male culture.
Yeah, I think the giving back idea is so strong. It's, again, certainly why I started this project. I was spending most of my free time learning various things. The analogy I like to give is my wife laughed me out of the room for watching a 6-minute video on how the Japanese grow strawberries or something. So the love for learning is there. And I just felt like it was part of my responsibility to translate some of what I was learning into information that would be beneficial to other people if they stumbled across it. And it's evident in literally any 50 to 60-year-old that you see. Everybody has this like giving back arc to their career, right? It's like, oh, I've reached the top. I shouldn't say everybody, but most people have this career arc that looks like, okay, we get to the top or like near the top somewhere. And then I find however many other people I can to mentor and help bring them up through the next ranks of where I was. So it's, I hope I'm short circuiting that a little bit by starting earlier, but we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, I think it's critical. I think it's great what you're doing, right? Because it's to me, it's tapping into the paternal instinct, right? And again, something that's not talked about enough is the value of fatherhood and the value of love and nurturing, right? As men, that's been so off the table for us. I think it's becoming more and more accepted, but still very taboo, weirdly. And what I see with the project that you're doing and the values and just getting to know you, I think being a father, whether it's to your own kids or to your community, right? Being a giver, a provider, a protector, that is deeply masculine. Whereas I think America, and I know you're in Canada, so maybe Western culture is like warrior culture. It's so much about like conquering and killing and slaying and bringing home the elk, right? But I think it needs to move to a more like father culture, because that is equally, if not in some ways more masculine than being the athlete and being the killer, is being the one that being the king, being like the patriarch, the benevolent patriarch, right? That like makes the country bountiful, makes the kingdom grow.
I think all this sort of distills down to mission or purpose as you sort of funnel all these
Mm.
different strength and courage and honor. All of this sort of funnels into the idea of purpose. And I don't know if you have any insights here, but in terms of how we can help people towards finding what their purpose is and maybe reorienting them away from something that they thought was their purpose as they walk through therapy and re-exploring what their actual purpose might be.
Yeah. So I have a little twist on that, but I'm curious if you'll enjoy it. So I think the biggest failing of my generation, the millennial generation, is needing purpose, is needing a mission, needing to change the world, being told that like we need to be like these heroes and needing to like, have this like wonderful perfectly encapsulated purpose. And there's so many coaches and therapists that have people write their mission statement and go through their values exercises. And look, like, I mean, I do all that literally on our code thing in the email as a values exercise. Right. But what I want to impress on to the listeners, and I'm curious what you think about it, is like, I think what we need more is direction. And what I mean by direction is like, just start walking, just pick somewhere and start walking. And your purpose will become clear as you accrue life experience, as you start to be like, okay, I kind of want to help people, right? It could be that vague. Or like, I kind of care about kids, right? Or like, oh, I kind of care about the environment. Great. Start doing stuff in green energy. And over time, you'll be like, okay, maybe I'm more of an engineer. Maybe I want to lead a green energy company. Maybe I'm more of an advocate. Maybe I'm interested in the politics. But I think like, having kids at 16 or whatever think about their college degree and be like, I want to be a green energy politician that serves, the rural Southwest and is part of the Democratic Party. Like, that is stupid. Like, you can't, like, that level of specificity, I think, just sets people up for disappointment and failure, rather than what I hope is like, again, pick a direction and just start walking, because so much of that very aspirational, very specific stuff, what I've seen in practice, it really intimidates a lot of people, and people start to feel less than, and they start to feel like they're never going to be that, never going to realize their dream. They're a failure before they even start, and they get paralyzed. So I would encourage listeners, like, again, just like pick a direction and start walking, and then do something like therapy or coaching or education or whatever to introspect and iterate and keep like refining and refining and refining, but having humility and being like, yeah, I don't actually know exactly what my purpose is, but I know something, again, like I just don't know what it's not. I guess that's another place to start.
No,
So I'm curious
it
your thoughts on
perfectly
that.
aligns to exactly my story and all of those pitfalls. My path in life from when I was like 14 was like, okay, I want to be an architect because my uncle's an architect and he makes all these cool cottages and I want to go do that and do whatever. And then I got to applying to university, and the only place that had an architecture program wasn't where any of my friends were going. So I picked the place where my friends are going that also had engineering, which was sort of like architecture, but it wasn't really. And then I got there and then discovered that it really wasn't for me when I can't do first year calculus because I haven't studied at all through my high school career because I coasted. And and sort of like backed my way into a whole bunch of different things. But like you said, you just start walking, and at the very least, you're going to find out what you don't want to do. But if you like sit there and think about it, I have another couple things that I'm just gonna pull up here because I love. And the first one is from a newsletter from Sahil Bloom that I read last week. He took a trip to India and gave a whole bunch of talks. And he just says, after the event in Bangalore, one of the attendees asked me for career guidance. I had just finished a 2+ hour talk in which I had conservatively shared 100 ideas and insights. Yet here he was asking for more. What I told him, you don't need more information, you need more action. Tomorrow, go act on one of the things you learned here today. Start there and build. In the modern era where information is abundant, you can literally access the best information from the smartest minds on any topic at the touch of a button. If information were sufficient, everyone would be rich, fit, and madly in love. Most of us fall into the trap that thinking that more information equals more progress. In reality, the information is cheap and the action is expensive. Instead of focusing on gathering information, ask yourself how you can take tiny action against the information you already have.
Yeah, amen. Right. I mean, that's the thing, right? It's like just do the thing, and be humble enough to suck at it, right? I mean, I think this is I don't have as many quotes as you, but I do have one from Adventure Time, right? And essentially, a quote is, the first step to being good at something is being bad at something. And I think like the superpower is like learn to be good at being bad at stuff, because especially for intelligent people or gifted students or whatever, right? Like we don't get good at getting bad at stuff, and that I've seen that paralyze so many men of being like, yeah, you're gonna suck for a while, it's okay, that's part of it, it's part of practice.
How do we, as a therapist or even as a friend walking with people, ensure that our vulnerability as guys doesn't mimic sort of the contrived vulnerability that we see on TV or in movies?
I think, to follow your logic, I think what a lot of guys will do is what I call performative vulnerability, right? So a lot of guys are like, well, you know what? I was like open with my girlfriend, but she still didn't do the thing I wanted her to do. I told her like how much that not having sex with me hurt my feelings, but she's not having sex with me. Right. And it's like, brother, that's not vulnerability. That's like persuasion. Like you're trying to like leverage emotions to get an outcome that you want, versus vulnerability, which is like having a conversation where you don't know where it's going to go. So oftentimes true vulnerability is just saying some wild shit, right? Like literally just like say something that's true that you don't know how it's going to go, and then just stop talking, and just see how the other person responds. I think that is more of what it means to be vulnerable. And that's hard. I think it's hard for guys because I think a lot of guys feel alone, and we don't want to be weak. We don't want to show our underbellies and all that kind of stuff. But what I found is useful, I don't know, maybe it's like a hack for a lot of masculine presenting men, is to do something very masculine. So for instance, I do wilderness retreats, right? So like we'll go like climb a mountain and like break some fucking sticks and like throw axes and like be like, okay, good. Like we're all men. Good. Like we know we're men. We know we're strong. Good. That's fine. Okay. Now we can talk about our feelings, So I think men need a lot of that reassurance that like the respect is still there, and that they're not going to become emasculated or they're not going to become shamed. And often that is by demonstrating their prowess in whatever the thing is. And then there's room for more of the emotions. I think trying to drill into the emotions without that like foreplay, for lack of a better term, I think closes a lot of men off, or makes men lie, right? We'll often like just say the thing, right? Performative vulnerability, say the thing so that the other person shuts up, not to connect with them, but just be like, okay, I did a feeling. Bye. I'm going to go back to drinking now, rather than actually having like a real conversation.
Have you heard about the Men's Shed initiative? Okay, so this is
No.
it dovetails perfectly with what you're talking about, men going to do the thing and then opening up. But it's an initiative that started in Australia in the 80s, I think. And it's men getting together and literally building sheds. And while they're building sheds, they're talking about their problems with other men while building a shed. And it's the idea that like men talk better shoulder to shoulder while they're accomplishing something than they do face to face and just trying to have that vulnerable conversation. So I think you perfectly have either there's obviously intention there because we know it works, but like have perfectly come to the same conclusion as the lovely men from Australia in the 80s. So I love it.
Yeah, I mean that's literally it. Yeah, and just what you said, like when you observe men, we're like broadside. Like we don't even look at each other, right? We look at like, and again, there's something evolutionary, right? Like if we're hunting that elk, we're looking at the elk, but then we're talking to each other. Whereas women tend to, yeah, look at each other and sit in circles. Men do rows, right, and look forward. And it's just like understanding that, being like, okay, why not fight that? Let's try to leverage this into something that's actually workable.
I love that this idea of telling the truth keeps popping back up in my life in various places. Is there a concrete example that you have in your life or in your practice where telling the truth has really brought about something that initially wouldn't have seemed positive, that looking back at is obviously the only answer?
Oh God, yeah, for sure. I mean, I think like the obvious one that comes to mind is my addiction, right? And the truth is like coming clean about being a drug addict, and not just about being a drug addict, because that's like the surface level. I'll back it up, right? So essentially, right, overweight Jewish kid, nerd, bullied into the ground, went to college, decided to reinvent myself, and I reinvented myself based on what I thought was cool, which was like drugs, punk rock, having a lot of sex, like being like a wild bad boy or whatever. But I'm not. I'm a freaking nerd, man. I don't know what I'm doing, right? But like, I really bought in full hearted to toxic masculinity to the point where I never said no. So when a drug was presented from me, like, oh yeah, have you done cocaine before? Of course, I love cocaine. Like, line it up, right? Like, oh, you want to drive home drunk? No problem. Every time. Done that 100 times before. You want to break into this building? Absolutely, right? You want to steal from the store? Absolutely. I'm not a pussy, right? Like that was so much of my life was just this fake fronting to the point where it eventually blew up in my own face, right? But like the truth was coming clean about kind of who I am and that I was really scared and that I was not this kind of character that I was making up. And, I lost a lot of friends, but those friends were friends that I probably should have lost to some extent, or maybe never have made to begin with. I lost a girlfriend, and that was probably for the best ultimately. It broke my little baby heart, but like for the best, you know, coming clean with like who I was and what I like and what I'm interested in was critical because I spent so much of my young adulthood and college years like hiding a lot of that and also trying on different masks. I did the other thing with like the Buddhism new age stuff where I became this like weird like monk with Dr. Shaman character that I created that was also based on World of Warcraft, but like no one had read the source material. So I was able to get away with it for a while. But like I put on so many masks throughout my life. And I think it's been like this constant shedding that has really helped me to develop the relationships and the connection to community and to be able to ask for help, be able to ask for help on stuff that I'm not proficient at yet. Maybe I will be one day. But it was scary. It was scary to be like, you know what? I've been not only am I now sober and drugs are bad, but I've literally been lying to you for the past 2 years, 3 years of my life. Like I'm not this person. I'm actually just like a dork. So that's one example.
Nice. I love it. I have one final question that I like to ask all my guests, and that is, what's the last thing that you changed your mind about?
How's it go on? The last thing I changed my mind about, let me think about that for a minute. I think the last thing I changed my mind about recently was that I can't do it alone. So with me and my fiance, Caroline, we moved up to this mountain town and I've never been in like a long-term relationship of that long. I obviously haven't been engaged before. And I think in a relationship with women, I've always done the performative vulnerability. I've asked for help, but never felt like I needed it. Right. I asked for help in the attempt to connect or to create intimacy or to bond. Right. Which I think is good. I think most men, should do more of that. Right. But it wasn't really until recently that I think I changed my mind of like, wow, I actually need somebody else. I cannot do it alone, whether that be life or, hopefully being a future parent. And that was humbling. That was really humbling because so much of my life has been oriented around being an individual and not needing anybody or not like, wanting people and accepting help, but not actually like needing. And it made me like, I guess really realize some limitations that I had that were painful to look at and to realize, hey, these limitations might not get better. Because it sounds like similar to you. Like I love self-improvement. I've read so many books and done all the courses and done therapy for 10 years. And it's like, wow, some stuff might not change. And I might need like some reinforcements around this. So that's probably the most recent thing that I changed my mind on.
Mark, I love it. Where can we send people to find all your great stuff?
Yeah. So the best thing is the website. So it's www.menstherapy.online. That has everything. So that's my company. We got a podcast on there. We got this email course that I'll be launching. It'll be on there probably about next week or so. We got videos. We got a YouTube channel. Got a Facebook. All that stuff. So just check out the website. We're also a men's community. I'm a therapist. I do groups. So you can also just talk to me. You can book a consult. It's free if you want to join or be part of the community or join a group or something. So yeah, menstherapy.online.
Perfect. I love it. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll talk to you again soon.
Yeah, great to be on the show. Thank you so much.